On the morning of Friday, October 3, 2003, 32-year-old Dave King walked out of the Physical Limits gym in Hoddesdon, thinking only of the day ahead. He never got the chance to live it. As he stepped onto Brewery Road, a white transit van crawled past, just slow enough to feel wrong. In the passenger seat, a man leaned out of the window with a Hungarian-made .47. In a deafening 3-second burst, he unleashed 26 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. 5 bullets tore into King's chest, arm and leg. He died where he fell. No warning, no mercy, just a brutal message, written in gunfire, echoing the savage legacy of the Essex Boys. This was no random drive-by. It was a gangland execution, planned with cold precision and born from betrayal deep inside Britain's underworld. In this video we are going to trace the rise and violent fall of Rolex Dave King, and the chain of vengeance that ended with his body on a pavement outside a gym. To understand why a man is cut down in broad daylight outside a gym, you have to wind the clock back a decade to a time when a small group of dealers ruled the nightlife of Essex and East London. Their names would become infamous: Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe. Together they flooded clubs and raves with ecstasy and cocaine, turning dance floors into their marketplace and amassing serious money and power. On the streets, they were known simply as the Essex Boys. This is the world that shaped Dave King, and before we follow his violent end, we need to follow his rise. If you are new here, this is where we dig into the cases that scar communities and leave families picking up the pieces. We tell the stories of betrayal, revenge and underworld justice that never make it into the glossy headlines. If you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us keep exposing these dark stories from Britain's criminal underbelly. It was in the early 1990s that Glaswegian hardman Dave King first crossed paths with Tony Tucker. Tucker was running a North London shop selling muscle-building supplements, a magnet for bodybuilders, wannabe tough guys and genuine fighters. King walked in as a customer, but he did not stay one for long. The two men bonded instantly over bodybuilding. At 6'3" and heavily muscled, King was an intimidating sight. He did not just look dangerous, he was more than capable of handling himself when things turned violent. That made him useful. Soon, he and Tucker were working side by side as minders for ex-WBC super middleweight boxing champion Hector Neil Ben. It was glamorous work, list clubs, VIP areas, rubbing shoulders with celebrities, but behind the flashes of cameras and champagne flutes, there was always an edge. Tucker also ran a lucrative security operation, supplying bouncers to clubs around Essex and East London. The money was good, upwards of £1.500 a week, and the control was even better. King quickly earned a fearsome reputation on the doors. In those venues, the sale of drugs was tightly controlled. Nothing moved unless the right people said so. Dave King was one of those people. But violence was never far away. During this period, King was convicted of viciously assaulting a man in Stevenage and stuffing his victim into the boot of a car. It was the kind of crime that did not leave many illusions about who he really was. The sentence put him behind bars, and while King was locked up, the criminal landscape outside changed forever. One cold night, down a lonely farm track in the village of Retendon, Essex, a blue Range Rover sat parked and silent. Inside were Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe. When they were found, Rolfe had been shot in the side of the head, Tucker's face was obliterated, and Tate had been hit once in the stomach and twice in the head. 3 crime bosses, slaughtered where they sat. It would go down in history as the Retendon murders, a crime that sent shockwaves through the underworld and left a power vacuum waiting to be filled. When Dave King eventually walked out of prison, the Essex Boys were dead, the game had changed, and he was about to step into an even more dangerous world than the one he would left behind. When Dave King walked out of prison, the old Essex Boys network was gone, but the demand for muscle, drugs and intimidation had not disappeared. It had simply shifted. King did not fade away into a quiet life. Instead, he plugged straight back into the underworld, this time through a feared East London crew known as the Canning Town Firm. If the Essex Boys had ruled the raves, the Canning Town Firm moved in a wider circle of violence. They were connected to some of the most dangerous football hooligan gangs, the kind of men who could turn a minor insult into a murder. Within this outfit, King became close to one particularly notorious member, 27-year-old Darren Pierman. Former Essex Boys associate turned crime author Bernard O'Mahony would later describe Pearman in chilling detail. On the surface, Pearman did not look like a stereotypical thug. He wore cardigans, kept his hair in a neat side parting, almost bookish, but underneath that mild exterior was a raging lunatic, with a terrifying reputation. O'Mahony said that with this crowd, if someone stamped on your foot, they got murdered. That was the level of violence they lived with. Dave King and Pearman moved through this world together, their friendship forged in the overlapping circles of clubs, drugs and football violence. One night, they ended up at Charlie Chan's nightclub. It should have been just another night out, but a single glass bottle changed everything. A fight broke out, a man was slashed in the face with a bottle, and chaos erupted. Doormen piled in to restore order. One of them was Ronnie Fuller, an ex-wrestler and the head doorman. But Fuller did not understand who he was grabbing. In that world, if you put your hands on men like Pearman and King and embarrass them in public, there is a price to pay. They had to keep their front. From that moment, bad blood ran deep. According to Underworld whispers, it was King's attitude that helped ignite the feud, the rogue group, fueled by ego, grudges and even a woman at the center of their dispute. Fuller and Pearman clashed again and again. In one earlier fight, Fuller reportedly got the better of Pearman, something Pearman was not willing to let slide. Exactly 4 years to the day before King's own death, the feud exploded at the Epping Forest Country Club near Chigwell, Essex. King and Pearman were there when Pearman spotted Fuller again. Tension turned into violence. Another confrontation flared up, and this time Pearman's gang came armed. Witnesses later spoke of a machete hidden in a sofa inside the club, pulled out when the fight kicked off. In the chaos, Fuller wrestled the weapon from Pearman. It was a deadly reversal. Pearman sustained horrific injuries. He was rushed toward Whipps Cross Hospital, in the back of a cab. But by the time they arrived, Darren Pearman was pronounced dead. His brother was also injured in the attack. For a while, it looked like Fuller might face justice. He and an associate were arrested and released on bail over the killing. But the streets had their own ideas about justice. On August 29, 2000, a motorbike pulled up outside Fuller's home in Grays, Essex. A hitman fired twice into his head and 3 times into his chest as he stood on his doorstep in front of his wife. Fuller died where he fell. No one was ever convicted of his murder. Police sources believed Pearman's father, Christopher, and elements of the Canning Town firm wanted revenge and refused to help the investigation. The message was clear: they would sort it themselves. Adding another dark layer, it later emerged that at the time of Pearman's death, the Epping Forest Country Club was owned by David Hunt, a man feared as one of the most violent gangsters in Britain, and suspected head of the Hunt syndicate. Dave King had survived this bloody chapter, but he was now deeply woven into a world where every feud seemed to end with someone on the pavement, and his own name was already in the middle of too many grudges. By the early 2000s, Dave King was not just another heavy on the doors. He was becoming a problem both for rivals and for the people he worked alongside. Inside the Canning Town firm, his presence was like a lit match in a room full of petrol fumes. One former member, John Rollinson, later said, "King's arrival came much against my better judgment. Once King joined up," Rollinson claimed, "he systematically turned people against each other, stirring up grudges and suspicion. Some men remembered him as a nice fella in his own way, someone who could be charming and even loyal. Others knew him only as a violent bully, quick to use his fists and his reputation to get what he wanted." But King was not just relying on muscle. Police investigations would later link him to the lucrative London trade in stolen high-end watches. It was here he picked up the nickname that followed him to his grave, Rolex Dave. In the shadows, rumors swirled that the watches he handled went far beyond dodgy market stalls, that he was supplying the Russian mafia, the so-called Bratva, feeding their appetite for luxury goods bought with blood money. At the same time, he pushed deeper into nightlife. King opened his own nightclub in Stevenage, calling it the Renaissance. Locals did not remember it for its music or its atmosphere. To them, it was a drugs haven, a place where pills and powder moved freely. One bar manager simply said it was full of them. The council took notice. By 2002, the Renaissance was shut down for non-payment of rent. But closing the doors did not close down King's ambitions. By now, his criminal portfolio was well established. He handled stolen property, moved drugs on the street, and began trafficking larger quantities into the United Kingdom. This was not small-time dealing. It was serious, high-risk business, the kind that earned him hundreds of thousands of pounds and painted a huge target on his back. The money showed. King lived in a £554,000 house in Ardely, Hertfordshire, a home far beyond what any legitimate income could justify. Behind the respectable front door was the reality. A father of two whose lifestyle was funded by crime. Rolex Dave knew exactly how dangerous his world was. That is why he watched his back, chose his company carefully, and, later, took to wearing a bulletproof vest. Then came June 2002. Customs officers intercepted a shipment of heroin worth around £100,000, 14 kilos of it. King and 4 of his associates were arrested in connection with the seizure. All 5 men were charged with drug offences. For most criminals, that kind of bust meant years behind bars. But something strange happened. The case against King, by then a family man on paper if not in practice, was dropped at an early stage. No trial, no conviction. One of his county defendants could not hold back his anger. In open court, he shouted that King was a grass. Inside the firm, that accusation landed like a bomb. For months, whispers had been growing that their operation had been infiltrated by a police or customs informant. Now, with King walking free while others faced prison, suspicion narrowed on him. Detectives would later say that King's associates were convinced there was a rat, and the ease with which King got off pointed the finger toward him. According to Detective Inspector Paul Maggie of Essex Police, King knew full well he had a problem. There was a threat to his life, and he could feel it closing in. His response was pure underworld logic. Instead of stepping back, he tried to strike first. King allegedly put out a contract on a man he had once called a friend, David Sharma, a North London associate who now found himself marked for death. So terrified was Sharma of the 6'3", 18-stone bodybuilder that he fled to the south of France, living under a false identity, trying to stay one step ahead of Rolex Dave. What King did not know was that the decision to target Sharma would trigger a chain reaction, one that would end with a white van, an AK-47, and his own blood on the pavement. In the criminal world, fear and loyalty rarely sit comfortably together. When word spread that Dave King had supposedly taken out a contract on his former friend David Sharma, it did not just frighten Sharma, it enraged others. 2 of the men arrested alongside King in the 2002 heroin seizure, Roger Vincent and David Smith, were not prepared to be quietly picked off. If King was hunting Sharma, they would hunt King. Vincent, a 33-year-old gangland debt collector and fixer from Penn, Buckinghamshire, was well known in the underworld. He was the man you called when someone owed serious money or needed a problem dealt with. Smith, from Borehamwood, Hertfordshire, moved in the same orbit, less flashy but just as dangerous. When they heard that King had placed a price on Sharma's head, they offered something chilling in return. They would have King shot, not for money, but as a favour to their terrified friend. To carry out the hit, they turned to a professional. They recruited Manchester armed robber Dean Spencer, a man already accustomed to guns and violence. The plan was simple on paper and deadly in practice. Go to King's home in Stevenage and kill him on his own doorstep. On September 22, 2003, the first attempt was made. Smith armed himself with a Webley .38 revolver, loaded with 5 bullets, and set off with another man to King's house. But King was not the type to ignore a looming threat. By then, he knew someone wanted him dead. He was with his long-time associate and minder, Ian Crocker, and he had started wearing a bulletproof vest. Outside his home, the 4 men found themselves locked in a tense, silent standoff. The air was thick with the knowledge of what each man was capable of. Spencer later admitted that in that moment, staring at King's size, his reputation in that vest, his nerve cracked. He backed out of the job. The killing that was supposed to happen that night simply did not. For King, it must have felt like proof that his precautions were working. For Vincent, it was a humiliation. Spencer's retreat infuriated him. In the underworld, there is little patience for a hitman who bottles it. Not long after, Spencer was arrested for an armed robbery. Under pressure in the interview room, he began to talk. He told detectives about the plot to murder Dave King, admitting that when he saw how big King was, and that he was wearing a bulletproof vest, he knew his little gun would be useless. But if Spencer was out, Vincent was still very much in. If anything, the failure hardened his resolve. He decided that if the job was going to be done, he would do it himself, and he wanted a weapon that would obliterate any advantage King thought he had. Vincent and Smith sourced a Hungarian-made Kalashnikov Axe 47, a variant of the Axe 47 with a folding metal stock. This was not a handgun you could hide in your waistband. It was a military-style assault rifle, the kind issued to paratroopers and special forces, and they did not stop there. They loaded it with full metal jacket armor piercing rounds. Bullets designed to punch through protection like a bulletproof vest. From there, the planning became meticulous. Over mobile phones, they discussed movements, timings and logistics, never imagining that one day those same records would be spread out in front of They stole a white transit van and a Mercedes to use as their vehicles, one for the hit, one for the escape and cover. Then they started to stalk Dave King. They watched his routines, his habits, the places he felt safe. The gym in Hoddesdon, the one place a bodybuilder like King would visit religiously, became a focal point. Day after day they waited for the right moment, one brief window where his guard would slip, his vest might not save him, and an ambush could be carried out in seconds. That window finally opened on the morning of October 3rd, 2003. The morning of Friday, October 3rd, 2003, started like any other for Dave King. He finished his workout at the Physical Limits Gym in Brewery Road, Hoddesdon, and stepped outside with his bodyguard, Ian Crocker. For a man who lived with threats, this routine must have felt almost safe. But the men hunting him had been watching, waiting. As King and Crocker walked toward their car, a white transit van rolled slowly along the road. At first glance, it could have been any tradesman's vehicle. In reality, it was a mobile firing platform. Behind the wheel was David Smith. In the passenger seat, cradling the Hungarian-made Axe 47 loaded with armor-piercing rounds, sat Roger Vincent. In that split second, King must have realized what was happening. The van drew level. Vincent leaned out of the window, aimed the rifle, and unleashed a 3-second burst. 26 rounds of full metal jacket ammunition ripped through the air. 5 bullets smashed into Dave King's chest, arm and leg. He died instantly, collapsing onto the pavement. Other rounds tore into King's car, struck Crocker, and punched straight through the brick walls of the gym. Some bullets even entered the gym interior, narrowly missing people inside. In court, it would later be described as a classic drive-by assassination, executed with chilling precision. It was also the first time that particular weapon had been used in automatic mode in Britain. Vincent and Smith sped away, thinking they would cover their tracks. The stolen white van and the stolen Mercedes they would use were later torched in an attempt to destroy evidence. But in the real world, almost no crime is perfect. Near the burnt-out van, police found a discarded plastic glove. Inside it was a clear palm print belonging to David Smith. It was the first thread in a web of evidence that would slowly tighten around the killers. The next day, miles away at Breydon Water near Great Yarmouth on the Norfolk Broads, a couple walking by the water spotted a man throwing a red sports bag into the river before running off. Suspicious, they pulled the bag back in. Inside, they found the Axe 47 assault rifle used in the killing and spare rounds of ammunition. Forensics did the rest. Investigators traced the weapon back to the Hungarian prison authorities. Ballistics proved it was the same gun that had killed Dave King. On the lip of the curved ammunition magazine, they found a trace of Smith's DNA. On a towel in the bag, they picked up saliva DNA from Vincent. Another towel carried fibers matching a distinctive rug in a flat used by Vincent. CCTV footage placed Smith at a filling station in Hoddesdon shortly before the shooting, wearing a distinctive hat. Mobile phone analysis showed calls made from Hoddesdon to Cannes minutes after the murder, Vincent and Smith contacting their old associate, David Sharma, to tell him that King was dead. Sharma wanted himself in connection with the drug case. Vanished. He was hunted across Europe by Interpol, but simply disappeared into the shadows. A fourth man, 38-year-old Julian Ellis from High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire, was convicted of assisting an offender after it was proven he would help Vincent lie low after the shooting. When police finally arrested Vincent, he did not present himself as a desperate criminal. He boasted that he made £250,000 in cash every year from a string of clubs across the east of England. He drove a £100,000 convertible Aston Martin DB7 and lived like a man untouchable. A court order froze £1.6 million of his assets, including his Hertfordshire home, a £1 million London property, and money spread across 4 bank accounts. Detectives said that whenever they spoke to Underworld contacts about Vincent, one thing was constant: people were terrified of him. He was not physically large, but his reputation for violence and for killing on demand was huge. At Luton Crown Court, the story finally caught up with them. father of 4, Roger Vincent, was convicted of Dave King's murder and sentenced to serve at least 30 years. His associate and getaway driver, David Smith, was handed a minimum of 25 years. Elis received 5 years for assisting an offender. Dean Spencer, the would-be hitman who had lost his nerve, admitted conspiracy to murder and was sentenced at a later date. Mr. Justice Wilkie did not mince his words. He called it a thoroughly planned, ruthless, and brutally executed assassination of a criminal by a small team, a killing carried out in a public street. In daylight, with an automatic firearm. It was, he said, only by great fortune that no innocent bystanders were killed. Behind the headlines, there was still a family. To the underworld, he was Rolex Dave King, a dangerous man, a violent enforcer, a drug trafficker who made a fortune and enemies in equal measure. To his parents, Jimmy and Norma, he was their Glasgow-born son, a football-mad family man who, in their words, was ambitious for himself and his children. A devout Muslim, whose bodybuilding was a central part of his life and identity. He was proud of his appearance, a perfectionist in everything he did. The people of Hoddesdon were shocked by the brutality of his death, but in the criminal world he inhabited, rivalries and executions were not rare. They were a way of settling scores. As one police source put it, whatever someone's past, no one deserves to be killed like this. But it was the way of the world he operated in. This was the rise and violent fall of Dave Rolex King, a man who built his life on fast money, intimidation and betrayal, until the same ruthless power he wielded turned back on him in a storm of bullets. If you found this case as gripping as we did, do not forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and give this video a like. It helps us bring you more real stories from the brutal world of organized crime. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this a betrayal waiting to happen, or just another inevitable casualty of the underworld?